They threw the black woman out of her best friend's wedding. Billionaire. X showed up, then her. Hello, my beautiful story family, and welcome back. We are so incredibly grateful to have you here with us today. Your support and your presence are what make this community so special. If you believe that sometimes our deepest heartbreaks can lead to our greatest triumphs, and if you love a story about finding your power when you feel most powerless, then please take a moment to subscribe and click the notification bell. You are not going to want to miss a single second of this journey. And now, our story. The air in the bridal suite at the opulent Northwood Manor smelled of gardenias, hairspray, and a faint electric tang of nervous excitement. Denise smoothed the deep sapphire silk of her maid-of-honor gown for the 10th time, her heart thrumming a rhythm that was equal parts joy and anxiety for her best friend. Through the ornate, gilded mirror, she watched Clara, a vision in ivory lace, her face a mask of serene focus as the makeup artist applied a final, delicate brushstroke. Breathe, see, Denise said softly, her voice a familiar anchor in the pre-wedding chaos. Clara's eyes met hers in the reflection, and for a fleeting second, the serene bridal mask slipped, revealing the girl Denise had known for 15 years. The girl she'd shared scraped knees, locker combinations, and tear-soaked phone calls with at 2 a.m. I'm trying, Claire breathed, her fingers twisting a loose thread on the silk robe she wore. It feels so big. Everything feels big. Big is good. Big is what you've always wanted, Denise reassured her, walking over and placing her hands on Claire's shoulders. She squeezed gently. You've got this. He's waiting for you. And I'm right here. Always. Always, Claire repeated, her voice a little distant. She placed her hand over Denise's, but her touch felt cool, her gaze drifting away. Denise chalked it up to nerves. It was a massive day. Claire was marrying into the Covington family, a dynasty of old money and corporate power that made Denise's comfortable middle-class world seem like a different planet. The groom, Thomas, was kind enough, but his family, especially his mother, Beatrice Covington, moved with an intimidating, glacial authority. Denise had felt it from the beginning. The subtle once-overs from Beatrice, the polite but pointed questions about her own career as a graphic designer, as if trying to place her within a rigid social hierarchy where she clearly didn't belong. But she'd pushed it all aside for Clara. This was Clara's dream, and Denise would have walked through fire to see it come true. Remember Mrs. Gable's history class? Denise whispered, a mischievous glint in her eye. When you swore you'd rather marry a toad than sit through another lecture on the Tudors. A genuine smile finally broke through on Clara's face. And you told me to aim higher, that even a toad could have a castle. Look at me now. She gestured around a luxurious suite. I got the castle. You certainly did, Denise said, her heart swelling with pride. They'd come so far from those giggling teenagers. This was the culmination of everything, the peak. But as the final preparations were made, a strange, unsettling quiet fell over Clara. She answered in monosyllables, her eyes avoiding Denise's. When Beatrice Covington swept into the room, a formidable figure in dove gray, she greeted Denise with a nod so curt it was an insult. Beatrice leaned in and whispered something in Clara's ear, her painted lips barely moving. Denise couldn't hear the words, but she saw the effect. The last of the warmth drained from Clara's face, leaving behind a brittle porcelain hardness. Denise felt a prickle of unease, a tiny, discordant note in the symphony of the happy day. She dismissed it. It was just wedding day jitters. It was just an intimidating mother-in-law. Her friendship with Clara was a rock, a 15-year constant in a changing world. Nothing could ever touch that. Reflection, question, friendship is one of life's greatest gifts. But have you ever felt a friend slowly drifting away, and you couldn't quite figure out why? What do you think is the hardest part about that experience? Share your thoughts with our story family below. 1,000 miles away, in a glass-walled boardroom, 40 stories above a glittering cityscape, Julian Vance stared at his tablet. But he wasn't seeing the quarterly projections his team was droning on about. He was looking at a newsfeed article popped up by the tablet's AI, which tracked the social activities of prominent families. The headline read, "Covington Hale Nuptials, Society Wedding of the Year." And underneath it, a photo. It was a candid shot of the bridal party from a rehearsal dinner the night before. And there, standing next to the bride, was Denise. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her smile just as radiant and life-altering as he remembered. Seeing her was like a physical jolt, a defibrillator shocking a part of his heart he'd long thought dormant. "Julian, your thoughts on the Asian market expansion?" A voice asked, pulling him from his reverie. "Projections are optimistic," Julian said, his voice flat, his mind a whirlwind. He closed the tablet. It had been 6 years. 6 years since he'd last seen her, since the fight that had shattered them. He had been so driven, so focused on building his tech empire, on proving himself to a father who was never satisfied. He'd let his ambition consume him. He'd let his family's quiet disapproval of his relationship with Denise, a smart, beautiful, but ultimately unconnected graphic designer, create a distance he was too proud and too foolish to bridge. He had chosen the empire over the girl, and he had regretted it every single day since. He had built that empire into something staggering. He was a billionaire 3 times over. He had everything he thought he wanted, and he was profoundly, achingly lonely. No one looked at him the way Denise had. No one challenged him, or made him laugh, or made him feel like more than just his net worth. He stood up abruptly, interrupting his CFO mid-sentence. "Something has come up. We're done for today." The room fell silent, his team staring in shock. He walked out without another word, his mind racing. He knew the wedding was at Northwood Manor. He knew he could be there in under 2 hours on his private jet. It was a crazy idea. A reckless, impulsive, insane idea. What would he even do? Crash the wedding of his ex-girlfriend's best friend? He wasn't a dramatic person. He was a man of logic, of calculated risks. But then he looked at the photo on his phone again, which he'd quickly saved. Her smile. That smile could launch ships and end wars. It had certainly launched his entire world, once upon a time. He wasn't going there to make a scene. He wasn't going there to win her back. That ship had sailed, and it was his own damn fault. He was going because he needed to see her one more time. He needed a final, real-life image to replace the ghosts he'd been living with for 6 years. He needed to know she was happy. He pulled out his phone and dialed his pilot. "Have the jet ready in 20 minutes. Destination, Northwood." As his car sped toward the private airfield, he had no idea what he was flying toward. He just knew he had to go. Back at the manor, Denise stood in the wings of the grand ballroom, watching as Clara and Thomas shared their first dance. The ceremony had been beautiful, a blur of heartfelt vows and happy tears. Now, the reception was in full swing, a sea of champagne glasses and polite, moneyed laughter. Denise felt a pang of loneliness, a feeling she pushed down immediately. Today was not about her. She was about to go congratulate the happy couple when Beatrice Covington intercepted her, a flute of champagne in her hand and a smile on her face that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "A beautiful day, isn't it?" Beatrice said, her voice smooth as silk. "It's perfect," Denise agreed, trying to match her polite tone. Beatrice took a small sip of champagne. "It is. We've all worked so hard to ensure that. To ensure purity of vision, of family." Her eyes swept over Denise, and the meaning was unmistakable. Before Denise could process the insult, Beatrice's gaze shifted over Denise's shoulder. Her smile tightened. "Claire, darling," she called out. Claire approached, her own smile looking brittle and strained. The collision was coming. Denise could feel it in the air. Julian's jet was beginning its descent, and Denise's world was just moments away from falling apart. The music swelled, a lush orchestral piece that filled the grand ballroom with a sound as rich and golden as the champagne flowing from endless bottles. Guests in tailored suits and shimmering gowns laughed and mingled, their conversations a low, pleasant hum beneath the melody. To any observer, it was a picture of flawless elegance, a fairy tale brought to life. But for Denise, standing between Clara and her new mother-in-law, the air grew suddenly, terrifyingly cold. The fairy tale was about to become a horror story. "Clara, darling," Beatrice Covington said again, her voice losing its silken edge and taking on the hard, sharp glint of steel. She didn't look at Denise, yet her every word was aimed at her like a weapon. "I believe there is a delicate matter we need to resolve. Now." Clara's smile vanished completely. She looked from her mother-in-law to Denise, and in her eyes, Denise saw a flash of pure panic, quickly extinguished and replaced by a chillingly blank expression. It was a look Denise had never seen on her best friend's face before. It was the look of a stranger. "What is it?" Denise asked, her own smile faltering. The music seemed to fade into the background, the joyful noise of the party becoming a distant, muffled roar. Her entire world was narrowing to this tense, three-person circle. Beatrice took a deliberate step back, a theatrical gesture that positioned Clara directly in front of Denise. It was a queen positioning her soldier for an attack. "My dear, you tell her," Beatrice commanded softly. Clara swallowed, her throat working. She wouldn't meet Denise's eyes. She stared at a point just over Denise's shoulder, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides, the knuckles white against the ivory of her gown. "Denise," Claire began, her voice a monotone, devoid of any warmth or history. "There's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding? What are you talking about? See?" Denise's heart began to beat a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. She reached out to touch Clara's arm, a familiar, comforting gesture she had made 1,000 times before. Clara flinched away as if she'd been burned. The recoil was so sharp, so violent, it felt like a slap. Denise pulled her hand back, stunned into silence. Around them, a few nearby guests began to notice the strange tableau. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A small pocket of silence was expanding around them. "Mrs. Covington has been made aware of some concerns," Clara continued, her voice gaining a cold, rehearsed quality. "Concerns that you might not have my best interests at heart today." Denise blinked, the words not making any sense. It was like listening to a language she didn't speak. "Concerns? Claire, I'm your maid of honor. I love you. What on earth are you talking about?" This was the moment. The precipice. Denise could see the war raging behind Clara's eyes. She saw a flicker of the girl she knew, the friend she loved, drowning in a sea of fear. But it was Beatrice who spoke next, her voice cutting through the air like a shard of ice. "Don't play coy," Beatrice sneered, dropping all pretense of civility. "We know what you were planning. The little scene you intended to cause during the toasts. An attempt to embarrass my son and drag this family's name through the mud. Did you think we wouldn't find out?" The accusation was so outlandish, so utterly divorced from reality, that Denise could only stare, dumbfounded. "What? A scene? Why would I do that? That's insane." "Clara told me everything," Beatrice said, delivering the final, killing blow. "She told me how you've been jealous of her good fortune, how you tried to talk her out of this marriage, how you resent our family. She finally saw the light and came to me, worried you would ruin her perfect day." Denise's head whipped back to Clara, her mind reeling, desperately searching for a denial, an explanation, anything. "Clara, is this true? Tell me this is a joke. Tell me what she's saying isn't true." Clara finally looked at her. Her eyes were no longer blank. They were filled with a cold, hard resolve that terrified Denise more than anything else. She was looking at Denise, not as her best friend, but as an obstacle. A problem to be eliminated. "I'm sorry, Denise," Clara said, and the apology was the most brutal part. It was not an apology for the lie, but an apology for the necessity of the execution. "I can't have anything ruined today. This is my wedding, my new life. I think it's best if you leave." Leave. The word hung in the air, monstrous and unbelievable. 15 years of friendship, of shared secrets and unwavering support, of being each other's person, was ending. Right here, in the middle of a crowded ballroom, based on a lie so venomous and surreal, it felt like something from a nightmare. You're kicking me out?" Denise whispered, her voice cracking, the full weight of the betrayal finally crashing down on her. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The faces of the surrounding guests swam in and out of focus. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, all staring, all judging. The maid of honor, the best friend, being thrown out. "I'm protecting my family," Claire said, her chin held high. She had made her choice. She had chosen the castle, the money, the power, and the price of admission was Denise. Beatrice, her victory complete, gave a subtle nod. From the edge of the room, 2 large men in dark suits, the venue's security, began to move toward them. They were professionals, their movements discreet but purposeful. Denise couldn't move. She was paralyzed by the sheer shock of it. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. She looked at Claire, one last desperate appeal in her eyes. "Please, see. Don't do this." Clara turned her back. That was the moment her heart truly broke. It wasn't the lie, or the accusation, or even the humiliation. It was the simple, final act of her best friend, turning her back on her. "Ma'am," one of the security guards said, his voice polite but firm. He was standing beside her now. His presence was a solid, undeniable confirmation that this was real. "If you'll come with me." He didn't touch her at first, but his meaning was clear. Her vision tunneled. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it all sounded like it was coming from a great distance. She was vaguely aware of people whispering, of phones being discreetly raised. She was the spectacle, the evening's entertainment. Numbly, she allowed herself to be guided away. She walked past tables of strangers, her head held high by some instinct she didn't know she possessed. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not here. The walk from the center of the ballroom to the grand, arched doorway felt like a mile. With every step, a memory of her friendship with Claire flashed through her mind, a shared ice cream cone, a whispered secret, a comforting hug, each one a fresh stab of pain. The heavy doors closed behind her, cutting off the noise and the light of the party. She was plunged into the comparative silence of the grand marble foyer. The guard led her to the main entrance and held the door open. "Have a good evening, ma'am," he said, the platitude so absurd it was almost comical. Then she was outside, standing on the stone steps of the manor, the cool night air a shock against her heated skin. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound of absolute finality. She was alone. The sapphire silk of her gown felt like a costume from a play she was no longer in. She had been publicly and brutally discarded. The central pillar of her life, the friendship that had defined so much of who she was, had crumbled into dust in a matter of minutes. The shock was a dam holding back a tsunami of grief and humiliation, but she could feel the cracks beginning to form. She stood there, trembling, wrapped in a silence that was 1,000 times more painful than the noise inside, when the smooth, silent engine of a black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb in front of her. The back window glided down, revealing a face she hadn't seen in 6 years. A face that haunted her dreams. It was Julian Vance, and he was looking right at her, his expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and a deep, gut-wrenching concern that threatened to shatter the last of her composure. The world outside the Northwood Manor was quiet, a stark contrast to the symphony of her public execution, still ringing in Denise's ears. The cool night air felt like a physical slap, shocking her system. She stood on the top step, a solitary figure in a sapphire gown, staring into the darkness. The dam of her shock was beginning to break, and the first waves of a grief so profound it threatened to drown her were crashing against her defenses. Her first instinct was denial. This had to be a mistake. A grotesque, theatrical misunderstanding orchestrated by that venomous woman, Beatrice. Clara, her Claire, the girl who knew all her secrets, the one who held her hand through her first real heartbreak, could not have done this. It wasn't possible. Her hands, trembling, fumbled in the small beaded clutch she carried. She pulled out her phone, her fingers slipping on the cool glass screen. She found Clara's name in her favorites list, the little photo beside it showing the two of them, arms slung around each other, laughing on a beach vacation years ago. The image was a fresh stab of pain. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. Then the call was cut. Not sent to voicemail. Declined. A cold dread, heavier and more real than anything she'd felt inside, began to settle in her stomach. She tried again. Same result. A brutal digital rejection. Clara wasn't just a victim in this. She was an active participant. She was screening her calls. She was reinforcing the wall she had just built between them. Denise's mind raced, a frantic, desperate scramble through 15 years of memories. She replayed every conversation they'd had in the last few months, searching for a clue, a warning sign she had missed. Had Claire seemed distant? Yes, but she dismissed it as wedding stress. Had she been quieter, more reserved around the Covingtons? Yes, but Denise had assumed she was just trying to fit in, to make a good impression. She had explained away every red flag, blinded by a loyalty that now felt like a fatal character flaw. This couldn't be the end. 15 years couldn't just vanish in a puff of smoke and cruel words. She had to fix this. She had to talk to Clara, away from her mother-in-law's poisonous influence. She would wait. She would wait until Clara came looking for her, full of regret and tears. She had to. It was in the midst of this frantic, spiraling denial that the sleek black car had glided to a stop. And when the window rolled down and she saw Julian Vance's face, a whole new dimension of horror was added to her nightmare. Julian, the great, painful, unresolved chapter of her past. The man she had loved with an intensity that had almost consumed her, and whose ambition had ultimately pushed her away. To have him see her like this, cast out, humiliated, her life in flames, was a fresh and exquisitely painful kind of shame. "Denise," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered, but just as familiar. The concern etched on his face was genuine, and that almost made it worse. She didn't want his pity. She couldn't bear it. "Julian," she breathed, her mind struggling to process his impossible appearance. "What are you doing here?" I was in the area," he lied, his eyes scanning her, taking in the formal gown, the haunted look on her face, the stark loneliness of her position on the steps. "I saw what happened. The end of it. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, the words automatic, a reflex of her wounded pride. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the broken pieces of her composure together. "You should go. I'm just waiting for my ride." Another lie. But the thought of getting into a car with him, of being trapped in an enclosed space with the ghost of their past and the fresh trauma of her present, was more than she could handle. Julian saw right through it. He wasn't the same young man she had known, the one who would have accepted her dismissal at face value. This was a man accustomed to command, to seeing the truth beneath the surface. He put the car in park and got out. He was taller than she remembered, his suit impeccably tailored, his presence radiating a quiet power that seemed to suck all the air out of the space around him. "No, you're not," he said, his voice soft but firm, leaving no room for argument. "You're stranded, and you're in shock. Get in the car, Denise. I'm not leaving you here." She looked at him, then back at the closed doors of the manor. The thought of Clara emerging to find her here with Julian, the man Clara had always secretly thought was too good for her, was a new, terrifying prospect. But the thought of staying here alone, waiting for a call that would never come, was worse. Defeated, she gave a small, jerky nod. He opened the passenger door for her, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that felt both comforting and achingly familiar. She slid onto the plush leather seat, the interior of the car smelling of him, a subtle, expensive cologne, mixed with something that was just uniquely Julian. It was the scent of a life she had once thought would be hers. He got back in the driver's seat, and the heavy door thudded shut, encasing them in an intimate, suffocating silence. He didn't start the car immediately. He just sat there, looking at her. "Talk to me," he said gently. "What happened?" And just like that, the dam broke. The sheer, unadulterated kindness in his voice, a kindness she had been so desperately craving, shattered the last of her defenses. A choked sob escaped her, and then another. The whole story came pouring out, a torrent of grief. She told him everything: the 15 years of friendship, Beatrice's coldness, the impossible accusation, Clara's final, soul-crushing words, and the walk of shame out of the ballroom. She wept, not for the loss of a wedding party, but for the loss of a sister. She wept for the girl she thought she knew, and for the naive woman she had been just an hour ago. Julian listened, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his jaw tight with a quiet, controlled fury. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just let her speak, his presence a solid, grounding force in her storm of grief. When she was finished, her voice a raw whisper, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with his anger, a righteous indignation on her behalf that felt like a shield. She chose the money, he said, his voice a low growl. She chose them over you. I don't understand why, Denise cried, wiping at her tear-streaked face. The lie was so specific, so strange. Why that? Julian's eyes narrowed. He was a man who saw the world in systems, in patterns of leverage and power. This wasn't random cruelty. This was a calculated move, a chess piece being strategically removed from the board. Because it wasn't about jealousy, he said, his mind already working, connecting dots she couldn't even see. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving with practiced speed. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This was a corporate decision. Beatrice Covington doesn't do anything without a reason. What are you doing? She asked, watching as he typed, his expression becoming darker and more focused with every second. The Covington family business, Covington Holdings, has been trying to acquire a smaller, rival logistics firm for the past year. A company called Logicor. The deal has been stalled for months by a series of anonymous whistleblower complaints to the SEC alleging financial misconduct and fraud. The complaints have been incredibly detailed, almost as if they came from an insider. He paused, then turned to look at her, his eyes intense. The founder and CEO of Logicor, his name was Robert Hale. He passed away 2 years ago. Hale? Denise repeated, her brow furrowed. That was Claire's maiden name. A jolt went through her. Robert Hale was Claire's father. He had died suddenly of a heart attack. Claire had been devastated. Julian's face was grim. Claire's father didn't just run the company, Denise. He was the company. He built it from the ground up. According to these notes, he was a meticulous record keeper. He kept a private ledger, a detailed, handwritten account of every deal, every shortcut, every shady agreement he ever made, including, it seems, several with the Covingtons before they became rivals. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture so ugly and cynical it made Denise feel sick. This ledger, Julian continued, his voice low and dangerous, was his insurance policy. Its existence has been a rumor on the street for years. If it ever got out, it wouldn't just sink the acquisition. It would likely lead to criminal charges for the Covington family. They've been hunting for it ever since he died. What does any of this have to do with me? Denise asked, her head spinning. Julian looked at her, his expression a mixture of fury and a strange, protective awe. After her father died, Claire was a wreck. She had to clear out his office. She told you it was too painful, that she couldn't handle it alone. So you helped her. You spent a week with her, packing his life into boxes. He held up his phone, showing her an old social media post. He had found a photo Clara had posted, thanking her her sister Denise, for helping her through the hardest time of her life. The Covingtons must have found out, Julian said, the puzzle now complete. They didn't just want to marry Claire to absorb their rival. They wanted access to her. They wanted that ledger. And when they couldn't find it, they came to the next logical conclusion. He locked eyes with her, delivering the final, stunning revelation. They don't think Claire has it, Denise. They think her father gave it to you for safekeeping. The air left Denise's lungs. The lie about her causing a scene, her being jealous. It was all a pretext. A smoke screen. They hadn't thrown her out because they thought she was a threat to the wedding. They had thrown her out to isolate her from Clara, to publicly sever their ties and send a message. They were trying to neutralize the one person on earth they believed held the power to destroy them. And Clara. Claire had let them. She had sacrificed her best friend of 15 years to protect her new family's dark secrets and secure her own gilded cage. I don't have it, Denise stammered. I packed books and papers. I wouldn't have known what it was. I don't remember any ledger. It doesn't matter if you have it, Julian said, his voice simmering with rage. It only matters that they think you do. And that makes you a target. In that moment, the entire ordeal shifted. This was no longer a personal heartbreak. It was something far more dangerous. The humiliation she felt was replaced by a cold, terrifying fear. Julian started the car, the engine a low, powerful thrum. He pulled away from the curb, his movements decisive. "We need to talk about us later," he said, his voice tight. "Our breakup, what I did, it all needs to be said. But right now, my only priority is making sure you're safe." He glanced at her, his past, present, and future all colliding in that one intense look. They picked a fight with the wrong person, Denise. And they have no idea that I'm back in your corner. Julian didn't drive toward the city's glittering, indifferent lights. He headed north, leaving the manicured suburbs and the sprawling freeways behind. They drove in a charged silence for nearly an hour, the landscape outside the windows melting from urban sprawl into dark, rolling hills and dense forests. The world was asleep. For Denise, it felt like she was in a dream, a strange, untethered state between the life that had just been incinerated and a future that was terrifyingly unknown. The revelation about the ledger had reframed everything. Her grief was still a raw, gaping wound, but now it was laced with a cold, sharp tendril of fear. They finally turned down a long, unpaved road, the tires crunching on gravel. The road ended at a pair of simple wooden gates, which swung open silently at Julian's command. He drove through, and the car emerged from the trees to face a vast, moonlit lake. On its shore sat a house. It wasn't a mansion like Northwood Manor, or a sterile glass tower like his city penthouse. It was a modern, elegant structure of dark wood and stone, with huge glass walls that seemed to invite the wild, natural world inside. "My lake house," Julian said softly. "No one knows I'm here. No one knows this place even exists, except my sister. You'll be safe." He led her inside. The interior was warm and masculine, with worn leather armchairs, a large stone fireplace, and shelves filled with actual books, not just decorative objects. It felt like a home. It felt like him, the Julian she had known before. The billions had become his entire identity. He didn't hover. He didn't treat her like a fragile victim. He simply showed her to a guest suite overlooking the lake, pointed out where the towels were, and told her to get some rest. His respect for her autonomy was a balm on her raw, wounded pride. She shed the sapphire gown, leaving it in a silk puddle on the floor, a relic of a dead friendship, and stood under the hot spray of the shower for a long time, trying to wash away the feeling of Beatrice's stare and Clara's betrayal. Sleep did not come easily. When she finally emerged from the room the next morning, wrapped in a thick robe she'd found, the house was filled with the smell of brewing coffee. She found Julian in the kitchen, staring out at the mist rising off the lake, a mug in his hand. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept at all. The days that followed unfolded in a strange, quiet rhythm. There were no discussions of revenge, no strategic planning sessions. Julian seemed to understand, with an intuition that shook her, that she first needed to grieve. He gave her space. He let her sit for hours on the dock, staring at the water, processing the 15 years of memories that were now tainted. He let her be silent, and in that silence, they began to reconnect. It happened in small, mundane moments. He'd bring her a cup of tea without asking. She'd find a novel she loved on his shelf, and they'd talk about the ending. One afternoon, she found him struggling to assemble a new piece of outdoor furniture. The instructions spread out on the ground, his face a mask of frustration. The billionaire titan of tech was being defeated by a Swedish coffee table. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like a spring thaw after a long winter. He looked up, and the smile he gave her in return was so full of relief and warmth that it made her heart ache. They talked, not about the Covingtons, not at first. They talked about the 6 years they'd been apart. He finally truly apologized for their breakup, his apology stripped of all ego. "I was a fool," he said one evening as they sat before a crackling fire. "I was so terrified of failing, of not living up to my father's expectations, that I treated everything, including you, like a rung on a ladder. I listened to the whispers from my family that you weren't enough for me. The truth is, I was never enough for you. I chose my ambition over our love, and it's the single greatest regret of my life." His confession was a key, unlocking a door to her own buried pain. "I let you," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I saw you pulling away, and I was too proud to fight for us. I thought if you had to be convinced to choose me, then I'd already lost." The honesty was raw, painful, and deeply cleansing. They were no longer the kids who had broken each other's hearts. They were two adults, scarred and humbled by life, sitting in a quiet house by a lake, finding their way back to a common ground they thought was lost forever. A new bond was forming, not one of fiery passion like before, but a deeper, stronger connection built on a foundation of shared history, mutual respect, and a quiet, profound understanding. She felt herself leaning on his strength, and she saw him softening in her presence, the hard edges of the billionaire smoothed away to reveal the man he was always meant to be. For a few days, in that secluded refuge, it felt like the outside world didn't exist. It felt like they could heal, but the outside world was coming for them. Middle reflection question: when you're going through a tough time, what helps you more? Someone trying to solve your problems for you, or someone who just sits with you in the quiet and lets you be? Share your experience in the comments. The shatter point arrived on the 4th day. It came in the form of a luxury SUV crunching up the gravel driveway. Julian saw it first from the kitchen window, his body instantly tensing, a protective instinct kicking in. He stepped out onto the porch as a frantic, tear-faced Claire practically fell out of the driver's seat. She had clearly tortured Julian's assistant for the location, a desperate, last-ditch effort. Denise heard the commotion and came to the door, her heart freezing in her chest at the sight of her former friend. "Denise! Thank God!" Clara cried, rushing toward the porch. Julian moved instinctively to stand slightly in front of Denise, a silent, human shield. "What are you doing here, Clara?" Denise asked, her voice flat and cold. "I had to talk to you." "I've been so worried," Clara sobbed, her performance worthy of an Oscar. "What they did, what Beatrice made me do it, was horrible. I had no choice. You have to believe me." Denise just stared at her, the woman she had once loved like a sister, and felt nothing. The emotional connection had been so brutally severed that all that was left was a hollow echo. "You had a choice, Clara," Denise said quietly. "You had 15 years of choices. You made this one. You don't understand," Clara insisted, her eyes darting nervously toward Julian. "They're dangerous people. They told me horrible things would happen if I didn't cut ties with you. They said you were a liability. I was trying to protect you. It was the final, unforgivable lie. Framing her betrayal as an act of protection was a manipulation so twisted, so deeply insulting, that it solidified everything for Denise. This wasn't a friend who had made a terrible mistake under pressure. This was a coward who had made a calculated decision to save herself, and was now trying to rewrite the narrative to soothe her own conscience. The friendship wasn't just broken. It was a fraud. It had never been what Denise thought it was. "Protect me?" Julian scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. "By publicly humiliating her and leaving her stranded? That's strange kind of protection. Stay out of this, Julian." Clara snapped, her mask of desperation slipping to reveal the venom beneath. "This is between me and Denise. This has nothing to do with you." She turned back to Denise, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Denise, please. You have to tell them you don't have it. Just tell them you don't have Dad's ledger. If you just stay quiet, this will all blow over. We can fix this. We can go back to how things were." And there it was. The real reason she was here. Not to apologize, not to salvage their friendship, but to silence her, to manage the threat. That was the moment the last vestiges of Denise's grief turned into cold, hard resolve. She looked at the pathetic, weeping woman in front of her and saw her for exactly what she was. The bond didn't just seem destroyed, it was vaporized, leaving nothing but the bitter ashes of a 15-year lie. "There is no use to go back to," Denise said, her voice imbued with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "And you are no longer welcome here. Leave." Clara stared, shocked that her tears and manipulations hadn't worked. Seeing the unyielding strength in Denise's eyes and the immovable fury in Julian's, she finally faltered. With one last, hateful glare at Julian, she scrambled back into her SUV and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and the stench of her betrayal hanging in the air. Denise stood on the porch, not crying, not shaking. She was strangely, terrifyingly calm. The final confrontation had been the ugly, painful closure she didn't know she needed. The question was no longer about saving a friendship. It was about what to do with the ruins. Later that evening, the calm had given way to a quiet, heavy turmoil. Denise was at a crossroads, and the weight of her decision felt immense. Julian came to her as she sat on the dock, the water a dark, placid mirror reflecting the star-dusted sky. He didn't sit down. He stood beside her, a file in his hand. "My team finished their work," he said quietly. "They found it." Denise looked up at him. "Found what?" "The ledger. It wasn't with you. It wasn't in any of the boxes. Clara's father was cleverer than that. He digitized it. It was hidden on an old, encrypted hard drive, tucked inside a false booklet on his shelf at home. The same home Clara now shares with her husband." He paused. "My people were persuasive with one of the Covington's disgruntled tech guys. We have a copy of everything." He held the file out to her. "It's all in here. Printouts. Details. Enough evidence of fraud, bribery, and racketeering to put Beatrice and her husband away for a very long time. It would destroy their company, their reputation, everything. Clara's new life would be obliterated." Denise stared at the file. It was power. It was vengeance. It was the justice she deserved, served on a silver platter. She could take it and burn their world to the ground, just as they had burned hers. The temptation was a dark, seductive pull. "Choice is yours, Denise," Julian said, his voice even. "Completely. I will back you, whatever you decide. We can leak this to the press tomorrow. Or you can throw this file in the lake, and we can walk away from all of this and never look back. It's your call." She looked from the file to Julian's face. He wasn't pushing her. He wasn't advising her. He was trusting her. He was empowering her. He was giving her back the agency that had been stolen from her. She thought of Claire's panicked, selfish face. She thought of Beatrice's cruel, triumphant smile. A part of her, the wounded, furious part, screamed for revenge. She wanted them to feel even a fraction of the pain and humiliation she had felt. But then she thought about herself. What kind of person did she want to be when this was all over? Would a life built on the ashes of someone else's, even an enemy's, ever feel truly clean? Revenge was about looking backward. She wanted to look forward, but walking away felt like letting them win. It felt like validating their belief that she could be discarded and silenced. She realized then that there was a third path, not the fire of revenge or the silence of retreat. It was the clear, bright of truth. She stood up and took the file from Julian's hand. She looked out at the dark water, then back at him, a new, unshakable certainty in her eyes. "I'm not going to burn their lives down," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to build my own." She tapped the file. "And this is my insurance policy." The choice was made. She would not be a victim, and she would not be a villain. She would be the architect of her own justice. The days following Clara's visit were not about plotting a dramatic downfall. They were about quiet, meticulous construction. Denise, with Julian's vast resources now acting as her toolbox rather than her crutch, began to architect her response. It was a response born not of rage, but of a newfound, unshakable sense of self-worth. She wasn't interested in the messy, public spectacle of revenge. She was interested in the clean, undeniable power of the truth. She spent hours on the phone with Julian's legal team, not as a victim seeking aid, but as a collaborator. They were stunned by her sharp insights and her clear-headed approach. The fire of her ordeal hadn't just forged her into something stronger. It had sharpened her mind to a razor's edge. Julian watched, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. This was the Denise he had always known existed, brilliant, determined, and utterly captivating. Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. She wouldn't leak the ledger to a gossip columnist or a tabloid. She wouldn't stoop to the Covingtons' level. Instead, guided by Julian's lawyers, she helped package the information from the ledger into a formal, anonymous whistleblower report, nearly identical in format to the ones Clara's father had once filed. This new report, however, was infinitely more detailed and damning. They submitted it not just to the SAC, but to the Department of Justice, flagging specific instances of criminal fraud. Simultaneously, she targeted the source of their power, their reputation. She identified the most respected, hard-hitting investigative journalist in the financial world, a woman named Alana Reyes, known for her integrity and her relentless pursuit of corporate malfeasance. Denise, using a secure, anonymous email, sent Alana a single, tantalizing breadcrumb from the ledger, just enough to prove its authenticity and point her formidable instincts in the right direction. It wasn't a leak. It was a tip. "Now what?" Julian asked, after the final email was sent. They were standing on the deck of the lake house, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple. "Now," Denise said, a slow, confident smile spreading across her face. We let the professionals do their jobs. And we start living our lives. And that's exactly what they did. Denise refused to let her life be defined by waiting for the other shoe to drop on the Covingtons. With Julian's encouragement and a small business loan, he insisted on structuring with a formal, professional interest rate. This is an investment in a brilliant entrepreneur, not a gift. He'd stated firmly. She finally took the leap she'd been dreaming of for years. She started her own graphic design and brand strategy firm. She poured all the energy that had once been spent on her friendship with Clara into her work. Her talent, now fueled by a fierce, clear-eyed purpose, flourished. She landed one client, then another. Her reputation for clean, powerful design and brilliant strategy grew. She worked out of a small, sunlit office in the city, a space that was entirely her own, built with her own courage and vision. Throughout it all, Julian was her silent partner, her biggest cheerleader, and her softest place to land. Their love story was no longer a dramatic, fiery affair, but a deep, quiet river. It was in the way he'd show up at her office with coffee at the end of a long day. It was in the way she'd instinctively reach for his hand when they walked down the street. It was in the shared, comfortable silences that spoke more than words ever could. He had learned that true support wasn't about saving her, but about believing in her. And she had learned that true love wasn't about losing herself in someone else, but about being seen and cherished for exactly who she was. The Covington empire crumbled, not with a bang, but with the slow, inexorable squeeze of justice. Alana Reyes's explosive expos, backed by meticulous research, landed on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The stock plummeted. The board panicked. The DOJ, armed with the whistleblower report, launched a full-scale investigation. Beatrice and her husband were indicted. Their assets were frozen. The society wedding of the year became a precursor to the corporate scandal of the decade. Denise learned all of this the same way the rest of the world did, by reading the news. She felt a quiet, grim satisfaction, but no joy. It wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was simply the rebalancing of a moral equation. She only heard from Clara once. A single, desperate text message sent from a number she didn't recognize, months after the scandal broke. "You did this. I hope you're happy." Denise looked at the message, at the pathetic attempt to cast her as the villain one last time. She thought about typing a scathing reply, about listing all the ways Clara had brought this on herself. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She deleted the message, blocked the number, and went back to work. Clara was a ghost from a different life, and she no longer had the power to haunt her. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Denise stood in the center of her bustling, successful office. Her team was laughing as they worked on a major campaign for a new client. The energy in the room was creative, joyful, and strong. It was everything she had built. The door opened, and Julian walked in. He wasn't wearing his usual power suit, but a simple, soft sweater. He held a small, velvet box in his hand. He walked over to her, his eyes shining with a love so profound it took her breath away. "I was wrong all those years ago," he said, his voice quiet but clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. "I thought I needed to build an empire to be worthy. I was so wrong. You, Denise, you are the entire empire. And my greatest ambition is to spend the rest of my life living in it." He got down on one knee. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a deep sapphire stone, the exact color of the gown she had worn on the worst night of her life. He was not erasing the memory, but redeeming it, transforming a symbol of her deepest pain into a promise of her greatest joy. "Marry me, Denise," he whispered. "Be my partner, my love, my home." Tears streamed down her face, but these were tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. She looked around at the life she had built from the ashes of betrayal, and she looked at the man who had loved her enough to let her find her own strength. "Yes," she breathed. "Always, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger. It was a perfect fit. The applause from her staff was a joyful, heartfelt sound, a testament to the community she had fostered. As Julian stood and pulled her into his arms, she knew this was not a fairy tale ending. Fairy tales were about being saved. This was a story about her saving herself, and in doing so, finding a love that was truer and stronger than any castle or kingdom. It was a love that was, at long last, real. This story ends not with revenge, but with justice and self-made happiness. Do you believe that the best revenge is living a full, joyful life on your own terms? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being a part of our story family, and we cannot wait to share another journey with you soon.